Are Gen 3 paddles back? Is this paddle even legal? And should you buy? Stay tuned to find out. Hey everybody, welcome back for another review. This one's on the Joola Mod TA-15. But first, I just want to run through some specs really quickly. These should all seem really familiar if you are coming from the Joola Perseus. The handle length is 5.5 inches, the grip circumference is 4.25 inches. This paddle is offered in a 14 and 16 millimeter option. This is an elongated shape paddle. The static weight on my paddle came in at 7.9 ounces. The swing weight was 119. And the twist weight was 6.1. This is a thermoform paddle, and it does still include the Gen 3 propulsion core technology that was seen in the original Gen 3s. The surface material is raw carbon fiber. This is classified as a power paddle, and this paddle comes in at a retail price of $280. First off, I just want to say that there has been a ton of drama around Joola and their initial release of their Gen 3 lineup of paddles. If you want to just hear about the performance of the Mod TA-15, I recommend you skip this section and just go to the next timestamp that's listed down in the description. Now, to start things off, I just want to clear up some confusion if you were wondering why the TA Mod 15 even exists. To summarize, Joola released the Gen 3s a few months back in what was described as the largest paddle launch in the sport's history. But then problems followed. A few weeks later, the USAP, which has been the governing body for paddle approvals, announced that they were delisting the Gen 3s from their approved paddles list, meaning that all of these paddles could no longer be played in tournaments that align with USAP's regulations for paddles. This was due to the initial paddles being sent in for approval by Joola, supposedly not matching the paddles that were released in retail stores. The biggest factor initially mentioned was controversies around the foam walls in the paddle, and that the released version of the Gen 3s had more foam than the originals that were sent in for approval. Later, the USAP then focused on the grit being the issue, as some paddles were like sandpaper to the touch. This was something many noticed upon release, with paddle faces being highly inconsistent due to bad quality control, which Joola has been known for in the past. Joola has then since filed a lawsuit against the USAP, and we are waiting to see how that plays out. In the meantime, the PPA Tour has now created their own governing body for paddle approvals called the UPAA, in which the PPA and MLP Tours will have a slightly different set of regulations that paddles will need to meet that may differ from the USAP. We also just saw some new variations of some Gen 3 paddles, which debuted at the Kansas City PPA Tour event. These paddles are being named the Gen 3S. This is a very 2010s Apple naming scheme, if you ask me. These paddles are the first approved paddles on the new UPAA list, which is why you may see some of their pros using them recently. So why does this paddle even exist? Well, this was the prototype name for the Joola Perseus and was the original paddle sent in to the USAP for initial testing. The same paddle that USAP claims is different enough from the retail release of the Perseus Gen 3 paddle. And I am here to confirm the Mod TA-15 is identical to the Joola Perseus. Well, almost. The only difference is the carbon fiber face is significantly smoother to the touch than the original Gen 3s. Now, you may be assuming that the Mod TA-15 must get less spin than the Joola Perseus Gen 3, and that's where you would also be wrong. My Joola Mod TA-15 spin test came back only 80 RPMs less than the original Gen 3, which, yes, is less, but is that enough to need to release a new paddle to meet this USPA standard? Chris Olsen over at the Pickleball studio cut open the original Gen 3 Perseus and the newly released Joola Mod TA-15, and there is no difference internally. These are the exact same paddle, same shape, same core, and same amount of foam. The fact that the Joola Mod TA-15 is approved and the original Gen 3s are not is sort of a joke. I think the USAP is in some serious trouble with this lawsuit and some of their recent decisions for passing paddles, such as the OWL paddle, when clearly that paddle should not pass their Stare-It test. This lawsuit will certainly be interesting to watch, but in the meantime, we do have one Gen 3 paddle that is USAP approved. The performance of the Mod TA-15 is going to be virtually identical to my last review of the Magnus 16mm. But to put it simply, this paddle is amazing. You get amazing touch around the net with good feedback, a great sweet spot to help with mishits, top tier spin with my test coming back around 2,211 RPMs, even with the less gritty carbon fiber face on this paddle versus the original Gen 3s. I understand why the Gen 3 paddle bothered a lot of people who weren't using them. The paddle does everything well and is a top, if not the top power paddle on the market. Using this paddle is the closest thing to a real-life cheat code in my opinion. I personally prefer the 14mm to the 16mm. The reason is I found that the 16mm gives you more power as the propulsion technology in this paddle gives the ball more dwell time on the 16mm versus the 14mm. Think of a diving board. The more you push down, the higher you will jump. Same concept with this paddle. The more that the ball stays on the face with dwell time, the faster the ball will shoot back out. Now, I do think that the 14mm is a more poppy paddle, meaning quick hits on short swings will be faster, but when you are driving from the baseline or hitting a big serve, I feel I get more power with the 16mm. Due to the 14mm having slightly less power, I do find myself having an easier time with drops and not popping up as many shots and dinks as I was with trying to control the 16mm. Your experience may be different than mine, as both these paddles perform very similar. And I think this comes more down to feel and how you manage pop versus power. If you loved a previous Gen 3 paddle, then this paddle is your answer to get that performance back. I do not think that Joola tried anything crazy with this paddle, as it is only black and white, which is very different than their bright colors seen in the Gen 3 lineup. I personally love the simplistic, modern look of this paddle. The stealth appeal to the branding on the face looks so slick. This paddle makes you feel like you are playing with an unreleased paddle only for the pros. Speaking of, this paddle even has Pro Player Edition on the side of the paddle. I am very happy with the design of this paddle. It's not flashy, but it is very sleek. To summarize, the Mod TA-15 really is not that hard. It's just a Joola Gen 3 Perseus. If you enjoyed that paddle and have been wanting it back, congratulations. The same paddle is back on the market with the USPA approved logo, so you can use it in tournaments. If you are missing the Scorpius, Hyperion, or Magnus, and you feel you can adjust to an elongated shape with a 5.5-inch handle, then the Mod TA-15 is also your answer. I cannot stress enough how amazing this paddle is. I usually am not a huge advocate for paddles that cost over $200 nowadays due to how many great paddles are on the market for an affordable price. But this Joola paddle with this technology is so unique, it can give you an edge over the competition if you know how to use it properly. Whether this paddle should be legal or not is a big conversation worth having, as it is causing the game to be played differently. But while it is here and looking to stay this time, I say try the paddle and see how fun it can be to play with. If you had a Gen 3 paddle in the past, let me know if you are going to purchase the TA Mod 15. If you have any questions or feedback, I would love to read those down in the comments. Other than that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.